Hello, everyone. I thought I'd review the Reading 9 study questions. This excerpt from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, chapter 13, the infamous and fascinating chapter 13 of Hobbes' Leviathan. Hobbes' Leviathan is essentially a work of political philosophy, but in the classical style, he believes that you have to have a theory of human nature to have a political philosophy that's grounded on anything. Because after all, political philosophy is setting out what the author takes to be the proper way that human beings should govern themselves as a community, what sort of institutions they should have, essentially. And that has to be based, they would say, on what human beings are like. That is, what kind of community we should have, and its rules and structures should be a reflection of who we are. That is, there's a traditional way of doing political philosophy. So, even for a fairly modern political philosopher like Hobbes, as opposed to an ancient one like Plato or Aristotle, they still thought that that's the way you began, with a description of what human beings were like, and then move on to some claims about how they should form their communities. So that's essentially what this chapter is, a description of what human beings are like and what human beings are like in the state of nature. The state of nature is an idea of what human life is like before there's any government, or when there is no government. That is, when human beings are left to their own devices, without any law, official law at least, without any institutions that might restrict their behavior with the promise of punishment. How would human beings behave? And Hobbes tries to paint the most frightening picture of that he can. Number one, in Hobbes, equality is actually a bad thing. Why? Well, we see that from the opening. He insists that human beings in body and mind, that is, in physical abilities and in intelligence, are really pretty much equal to each other. That we like to think, especially when it comes to our wisdom or our sagacity, that we're better than other people, but we're really not. We're all basically equal human beings. I mean, obviously there are outstanding people, I guess, physically and mentally, but essentially we're pretty much equal. But this is actually a bad thing. Why? Well, it's equality of the equality here is the equality of power, and in the state of nature, this equality of power leads to equal hopes in getting what we want, and that leads to conflict. And that's why it's a bad thing, is that our awareness that we are pretty much equal in power to each other leads to conflict in getting what we want. And that's a very important part of this whole thing, because it's that conflict, that really mortal conflict, which leads to the creation of government. Number two, in the state of things that he is describing, Hobbes claims that, quote, there is no way for a man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation. What does this mean? I take him to mean that you should strike the first blow. That is, in the state of nature, where there is no law that constrains human behavior, that will tend to be selfish and violent. And that the only way that we can really secure ourselves, that is, protect ourselves, is by not waiting to be attacked, but by attacking first. It's a pretty brutal way of thinking, but that's what I take anticipation to mean, anticipatory action. I know that human nature being what it is, somebody will eventually attack me, try to take away what I have in the state of nature, so it's reasonable to attack them first for self-protection and for gain. This is part of this very frightening picture that he's painting of what human life is like in the state of nature. Number three, do you think that human beings need, quote, a power able to overawe them all? Why or why not? Obviously, it's an open-ended question. But it probably is the most important question, I think, that we ask of Hobbes and his theory of human nature and his theory of the state, because the power able to overawe them all means government, very powerful government, able to overall all the individuals in a community, to keep them in line, basically. That human beings, because of their nature, because of their selfish, impulsive, desire driven nature, they will act unjustly, you might say, if that makes any sense, without a power able to intimidate them, to overawe them. So, this is a very deep question I believe that everyone has to answer for themselves, whether or not they believe that that's really true, which is essentially making a judgment about human nature itself. Is this what people are like? That is, can individuals as a whole, across populations, exercise the kind of self control needed for civilization without an external power to intimidate them and to force them, basically, to act in a lawful way? I think it's one of the deepest questions. And I don't know the answer to the question. I really, really don't know the answer to the question. But I think it's probably one of the most important questions each of us has to answer for themselves, because it reveals what we really think about ourselves and about others.